tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
But one group that has been conspicuously silent throughout all of this has been the group you would expect to be the most vocal about this, the Jewish studies programs on university campuses. Now, when I was at university, I took a class on the Jewish history of North America, which was a fascinating class. I learned a great deal about how integrated Jews were in the historic and cultural fabric of Canadian and American society. And there were a lot of programs just like that around the country, and a lot of professors in these spaces that have not been speaking up about this. Barbara Kay wrote about this in a piece in the National Post, where she is one of my favorite columnists, and I suspect one of yours as well if you read there. Barbara, always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
So I'll start. Let's accept your premise at face value, because I think you're very correct about this. I have not seen a large and vocal condemnation from these or any other academic groups. But is this coming from a tacit or explicit agreement with these activists, or is it coming from fear that these professors do not want to stick their necks out and be even further marginalized?
Well, first I should say that although Jewish studies, you're correct, the Jewish studies departments have been institutionally pretty mute. There have been many individual Jewish academics who have been quite vocal, but they are vocal as individuals or as part of some very ad hoc networks, academic writers networks, and they write op-eds and they, write for all kinds of publications. I have no core,
but they tend to be the pariahs for doing
well,
so.
Either let's just say that they're out there on their own. I mean, I don't think they're condemned in their, professionally. I don't think they face cancellation within their departments. But institutionally, the Jewish studies departments and the Association of Jewish Studies, which is an American organization, I'm not sure if it covers Canada as well, they have been not only not vocal in opposition to all this anti-Zionist and anti-Jewish activity, but they are officially, one might say, sympathetic to the anti-Zionist movement. Many of them, some of them are active in the BDS movement. I'll give you one example. A former rabbi in my synagogue in Montreal described this to a group of us at a learning day at our synagogue. He said when he'd been a rabbi and then he had taught in the Jewish Studies department at Drew University. And he said he went to, this was 2 years ago, he went to the annual conference of Jewish Studies, the Association of Jewish Studies, which is for that discipline. And he said the theme of the conference was justice. And he said the major push of the conference was justice for the Palestinians. And he described one exhibit, an artistic exhibit that was a series of photographs of Palestinian children, only you didn't see their faces, you just saw their outstretched arms, and on their arms they had, with Sharpies written, tattooed numbers, which I don't have to tell you is a Holocaust inversion tactic of just the lowest and the really very undignified and very hurtful, needless to say, to those who remember the Holocaust or who have had relatives killed in the Holocaust. So this idea of using the Holocaust against ourselves in order to whip up a sentiment of a very acute, level for Palestinians, as opposed to, and this is the kind of thing you see quite often. It comes under the heading of what I would call pathological altruism, in which you're so concerned with the harms that your side of a conflict is causing to the other side that you won't take your own side. What was that definition of a liberal? Someone who won't take his own side in an argument. Anyways.
Yeah, and I would also point out too that studying something, women's studies, gender studies, Jewish studies, all of these things, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is a support for the group being studied. I think, one example of this, I forget the name of the university, but there was like some men's studies department that was launched, and you looked at the faculty for it, and it was like every single one of them, I think, probably hated men more than anything else in the world. And, Jewish studies, you do see a lot of Jewish professors in there, but a lot of them are not necessarily Zionists. And again, nor should they be necessarily. There shouldn't be a litmus test if you're able to teach the material and teach it well. But the reality there is that a lot of these departments, a lot of the social sciences in general, have all been taken over by this oppressor-oppressed dynamic. And when you can't even teach math or chemistry without talking about decolonizing the curricula, certainly in Jewish studies, you're seeing those very same dynamics. And I think that's why a lot of these departments have been so silent on this.
Well, I agree with you, and I think the whole rubric of intersectionality, in which Jews are routinely excluded. They are not considered. Intersectionality is, of course, the intersectionality of all victims, the oppressed. And Jews are never included in the category of the oppressed. They are always part of the oppressor group. So it sort of conflates Jews with their state. And as you say, many Jews are not particularly Zionist. But when Jews in authority over other students, or in a position of authority over students, and they're in a Jewish studies program, become actively anti-Zionist, or are part of the BDS movement, or are teaching anti-Zionism rather than teaching it as part of, history, and here's the situation today, and here is here is when Zionism, the concept, started, and who started it, and who was for it, and who was against it. That's history. But once you already have a Jewish state, and Zionism obviously won the argument, you can't keep arguing that Zionism is a curse, as Naomi Klein has called it. You cannot say it must be ended. How do you end Zionism? You would have to end Israel in order to end Zionism. So it's a very different kettle of fish. Last night, the Monk debates, Andrew, I don't know if you saw them, but anyways, wonderful international lawyer Natasha Hausdorff teamed up with Douglas Murray, the incredible Douglas Murray, and they were discussing this very thing. And Natasha said, look, you don't have to be a Zionist, but think of it as this way. It's like if a mother and a father, if two parents, if a man and a woman get married, and they say they don't want to have children, they both agree they don't want to have children, but by accident they have a child. You don't agree that it's okay to murder the child. I mean, because they didn't want it, right? Like, So we have a state with 7 million Jews in it. That's half the world's population. And for anybody in Jewish studies today to be arguing that not only was Zionism a mistake, but it's a mistake that has to be rectified, then you have to be very careful with your words. What do you mean? It was a mistake, and now the state of Israel is illegitimate for that reason. I'd be happy if all kinds of movements that ended up in national movements, or that had been considered illegitimate before they became nations. Israel was created as a nation along with many other nations in the Middle East. Nationalism was not a thing a century ago, and it became a thing. So this idea that you can just loosely play with the idea of, Zionism, big mistake, let's try something else. And the something else that a lot of Jewish studies professors are into now is this thing called diasporism, which is, Zionism was a big mistake. You know what? We need to be Jews who we repudiate Zionism, and it's good. Jews were meant to live in exile because their rationale is it is unnatural for Jews to have power over anybody else. Okay, for other people.
When you have a very, very extreme subset of Orthodox Jews that believes that, but it's an incredible, incredible minority.
It's so fringe that I never even include the Natura Carta people. are like, they're crazy people. I consider them literally crazy. They are living in such a bubble of, and they have no influence whatsoever, except insofar as they are used as tools, by the Palestinian ists. And yeah, I mean, but nobody, no Jew I know ever even mentions them in a calculus of where are we going and what's happening in the world. They are beyond beyond the pale, so beyond the pale that Orthodox Jews want nothing to do with them, and even Chabad and all these other people, they're off the map. But we're talking now about very mainstream people who do have influence and authority in universities. They're academics. They are in, institutions like Hillel and all kinds of places where young Jews look to them as models and authority figures, and they're saying, we should be happy in exile. We should not have power over other people. We've misused it. It's okay, but everybody else is allowed to have power over Jews. I mean, if we're should be happy to live in exile, then we're basically saying we are contracting out our right to have power over anybody. But you can have power over us. You can have power over us, but we can't have power over anybody else. So how did that work out for us throughout history? Not so well.
Not that, I was about to ask you, what Jews think of a certain subject. And then as I was doing so, the old joke of, 3 Jews and 5 opinions come to mind, is that, Jews can't even necessarily agree with themselves, let alone each other on a lot of matters.
Well, that's true. But the upside of that is, I mean, it's both an upside and a downside. The upside is we grant anybody in Israel here, any Jew can say what's on his mind or her mind without fear of getting bumped off or even spat at or, getting doxxed on. I mean, we allow perfect freedom of expression within our people. And our people, we are bonded, not as Christians are by belief. We are bonded by peoplehood. So we admit to, without resentment, yeah, there's super Orthodox and there's totally secular, there's atheists, and there's this and that. We don't care. We don't care. What we care about is your commitment to Jewish peoplehood and to furthering the healthy interests of the Jewish people. Now, that doesn't mean you have to support Israel and everything that Israel does. You don't have to support Zionism. You don't have to support any of that. But it doesn't give you license to align yourself with the enemies of the Jewish people and to say, yeah, you've got the right idea. Yeah, eliminating Israel, good idea. And that's what, these groups like Independent Jewish Voices and Jewish Voices for Peace, they're using their status as Jews to join in the chorus of voices that wish Jews would disappear from the face of the earth. And they are abetting them and giving comfort to them and saying, speaking as a Jew, or, yeah, my grandmother, who's dead, unfortunately, in the Holocaust, would have approved. That's something that you see people like, I've seen Jews say, oh, she definitely would have been on a BDS. She definitely would have been ashamed of what Israel's doing. I don't think so. I think
these are the same as the Christians that say, Jesus would have been trans or something. Like you see all of this weird revisionism. But I wanted to ask you about that, Barbara, because there is, to use the language and worldview of the left here, which talks about privilege as, basically meriting or taking away the merit of your position. A lot of the Jews that do this, I've seen, are ones that have tremendous amounts of privilege. They are Jews that have not had to deal with anti-Semitism, or at least not that I would see. They're Jews that oftentimes are coming from very upper middle class, if not outright wealthy families. And you see this in other groups as well. I mean, the number of environmental activists whose parents are, these, billionaires or something is insane. But that doesn't really matter when you're saying the quote unquote right things, in the same way that all of the indigenization of curricula now and the importance of connecting to your people to history doesn't apply to Jews, because Jews are also bound by their history and by their connection to the land that we now call Israel. But that deep connection doesn't matter when you have been maligned as the quote unquote oppressor.
That's right. I mean, you can say, as some diasporists do, they say, oh yeah, all that stuff about next year in Jerusalem and my heart belongs to Zion and all that. That's just romantic stuff. It's like a metaphor. It doesn't literally mean that Jews have to be attached to the land of Israel. Well, sorry, but it does. And if you want to detach yourself from the Jews, I don't care. Say I'm not a Jew anymore. I'm out of here. Fine. All I ask is, you know what? Don't dump on the rest of us, and don't help other people who would really like to see us disappear. Is that too much to ask, really? And don't say, speaking as a Jew. Even Trotsky in the Soviet Union, his name used to be Lev Bronstein, but he didn't say, speaking as a Jew, I'm a party member and I believe that Jews should be persecuted people. Like, just decide one or the other. I'm not with you. I'm out of this, people. Goodbye. Good luck. And I'll just go my own way. But the privileged Jews you're talking about, yes, they're the university crowd. They want to be part of the herd. They've bought into the whole intersectional thing. They've bought the whole, and they're very full of self-righteousness. They see themselves as the new prophets, and they are using they're weaponizing their status, their sociological status as Jews to abet a perniciously anti-Semitic movement. And then there's the Jews that are just plain ignorant, and they're what I call useful idiots, who go along because they get all their news from TikTok, and they're incurious. They don't know anything about history. They know nothing, and they're foolish, silly people. They need a cause. They're looking for something. They have no connection to their Jewish history or past or communities. No deep connection, anyways. And they don't have a cause, so they're looking. And in a way, they feel this is a social justice cause. They've been trained to think that way. They think that Israel is a colonialist state, which it isn't. It isn't an apartheid. These are all libels, but they believe them. Why shouldn't they? Their propaganda mill, the BDS crowd, their propaganda mill is phenomenal because they don't have to worry about studying or doing anything constructive in life. This is their whole life, is relentless propagandizing against Israel and the Jews.
Well, I appreciate it very much. And like I've said to you in the past, Barbara, I'm so grateful you continue to use your voice in the way that you do when there are so many costs to doing so in this day and age. And I appreciate it very much. Barbara Kay, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.